If you grew up in 1970s Britain, you remember a childhood that doesn't really exist anymore. Not because people exaggerate it, but because the world itself worked differently. Time moved slower, adults worried less about where you were every minute, and freedom wasn't something you were given, it was something you simply had. Summer evenings meant the front door opening after tea, a quick reminder to be back when it got dark, and then you were gone. No phones, no check-ins, no tracking. The street belonged to you until the street lights flickered on and someone shouted your name from a doorway. You didn't question it, you just knew that was the rule. Home by dark. Until then, the world was yours. The streets weren't empty, they were alive. Groups of kids everywhere, drifting between gardens, alleys, bomb sites, half-built estates. Patches of wasteland that adults ignored and children turned into kingdoms. You didn't need toys to create adventure. A curb, a ball, and a few mates were enough to fill an entire evening. Kirby on the pavement until someone got caught out. British bulldog in the park until knees were bleeding and jumpers were stained green. Dens built from scrap wood, old doors, and whatever you could carry without being noticed. There was a constant background noise to it all. Bike chains rattling, trainers scraping tarmac, someone laughing too loudly, a radio playing from an open window. Cars passed but slowly. Drivers expected children to be everywhere because they were. Everyone knew everyone. You recognized faces streets away from your own because you'd crossed paths 100 times already. Bikes were freedom in physical form. Choppers with their high handlebars and massive back wheels. Grifters that weighed a ton but could survive anything. Rally burners if you were lucky. You rode for hours without a plan, building ramps from planks and bricks, attempting jumps that should have ended in disaster. Sometimes they did. Bruises were currency, cuts were stories. You learned limits by finding them the hard way. Saturday mornings were sacred. You'd wake up early without needing to be told, padding downstairs in pajamas, grabbing a bowl of cereal so sugary it would never be allowed today, and planting yourself inches from the telly. There were no choices to scroll through, no rewinds. If you missed something, you missed it. That made it matter. Swap shop or tiswas. Arguments at school about which was better could last all week. The cartoons felt like they belonged to everyone at once. The adverts were as memorable as the programs. Those mornings weren't just television, they were ritual. The corner shop was your training ground for independence. The bell above the door, the smell of newspapers, sweets, and something slightly old. The owner knew your name, your parents, and how much pocket money you had. You counted coins carefully on the counter, hoping you weren't a penny short. Sometimes they let you off, sometimes they didn't. You learned maths, confidence, and negotiation all in one place. 10 pence felt like a fortune. Penny chews actually cost a penny. Space dust fizzed on your tongue. Cola cubes, fruit salads, blackjacks, sherbet fountains poured into paper bags weighed on scales that clicked into place. You carried your haul home like treasure. That shop sold everything: bread, milk, cigarettes handed to kids on errands, firelighters, newspapers. It was woven into daily life. When those shops vanished, whole neighborhoods quietly lost their center. Not everything was carefree. The 1970s were hard in ways children didn't fully understand at the time. Power cuts arrived without apology. The television went black mid-program, candles appeared, torches were passed around. Homework by candlelight felt like an adventure until it didn't. Parents worried quietly about wages, heating, and strikes. Children absorbed the atmosphere without grasping the stakes. Fashion now looks ridiculous, but at the time it felt normal. Tank tops knitted by nans in colors that clashed violently, flares wide enough to hide contraband, platform shoes that turned pavements into obstacle courses. Hair grew long, teachers hated it, you didn't care. Clothes were often homemade because shop bought was expensive. You wore what existed. Sundays had their own rhythm. Radio in the morning. Roast dinners that filled the house with steam and gravy. Everyone at the table, no excuses. Pudding that was heavy, warm, and comforting. The evening carried that slow, sinking feeling that school was coming. Baths whether you needed them or not. Shoes polished, bags packed. The smell of soap, polish, and resignation. Houses had smells that are impossible to recreate now. Cigarette smoke in every room. Furniture polish, whatever was frying, your mum's perfume, your dad's aftershave, coal fires, your nan's house smelling of lavender, mothballs, and overcooked vegetables. Those smells meant safety, they meant home, and once they're gone, they're gone. Toys were dangerous because safety wasn't the priority. Clackers shattered, chemistry sets actually contained chemicals, bikes tipped backwards, roller skates caught on cracks and sent you flying. You learned caution through pain. You learned limits by crossing them. School was strict. Teachers ruled absolutely. Punishment was physical, public, and unquestioned. Parents sided with teachers. You adapted. You behaved. You learned where lines were drawn. None of this was perfect. The decade had problems that are impossible to ignore. But for children, there was a sense of freedom that's hard to describe to anyone who didn't live it. You weren't supervised constantly. You weren't documented. You weren't compared endlessly. You were just there, present, moving through a world that trusted you to come home when the lights came on. And that trust shaped everything that followed, and that trust carried into moments that felt ordinary then, but now seem almost impossible. You walked to school alone from an age that would raise eyebrows today, satchels bouncing against your back, shoes scuffed within weeks, routes memorized not because they were planned, but because you'd walked them so many times they lived in your feet. You crossed roads without lights, judged gaps by instinct, learned to read engines by sound. If you were late, you ran. If you fell, you got up. No one phoned ahead, no one panicked. School dinners were an experience of their own. The smell hit you before you saw the hall. Steam, boiled vegetables, gravy that coated everything whether it was invited or not. Metal trays clattered along counters. Pudding was often the reward you endured the rest for. Pink custard, jam sponge, rice pudding with a skin you learned to break carefully. Some days it was dreadful, other days it was the highlight. Either way, you ate it because that's what there was. Milk bottles waited in crates outside classrooms, no matter the weather. In summer, they were warm. In winter, they were half frozen. You drank it anyway. It was part of the day, as fixed as the register. Teachers smoked in staff rooms. Sometimes the smell drifted into corridors. Nobody commented. It was just the air of adulthood. After school meant disappearing again. Homework was lighter, expectations were simpler. You kicked a ball until it was too dark to see properly, then played on anyway. Someone's mum shouted from a doorway. Another's dad stood with arms crossed, watching silently. Adults were present, but distant. They trusted the world to do some of the teaching for them. The television in the evening felt different to Saturday mornings. It was family time, whether you liked it or not. One screen, one choice. Programs watched together. Arguments over channels that ended because there was no alternative. You learned to sit through things you didn't enjoy because someone else did. Which houses had footballs in the garden? Which windows would open if you knocked? Community wasn't a word, it was just how things worked. Looking back now, what hurts isn't just that things changed, it's that they changed without ceremony. Streets emptied, shops closed, doors locked, children were brought inside. Freedom was slowly replaced with supervision, trust replaced with caution. Not because people wanted it that way, but because fear crept in quietly and stayed. Those who grew up in that time don't talk about it because they think it was perfect. They talk about it because it was formative, because it shaped how they see the world, because it gave them something solid to stand on when everything else sped up. You don't miss the decade itself. You miss the feeling of it, the sense that life was unfolding rather than being managed. That you were part of something shared and unspoken. And once you've lived in that kind of world, you carry it with you forever.